Hello, everyone. Now we're going to get into the last bit in the framework for scientific investigation. What it's going to look like for you guys to write well in science, communicate well, and present your findings in a way that actually communicates what you wanted to communicate, that actually leads to, like, let's do an example here. Why is this important? Well, you want to show that there should be an appropriate response because of the results that you've gotten. That let's think about this in terms of conservation. That let's say you were trying to figure out how to best conserve a species or of an animal or something like that. You could give your results over, and you're hoping that what that leads to is that maybe the government will actually start to try and think harder about how to conserve this thing based on the results that you've gotten. It can be really important. So hopefully in this video, I'm going to try and show you how I would do it. I'm going to use a report that I've written earlier in my life as a scientist to help you do this and try and show you my thoughts on how to do it. So hopefully you get something out of this. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is how, before I actually show you an example, is just how do you actually set out a scientific report. And the one model that I like to use, someone else might have a different way of doing this. Remember, you have to find your own way of writing. We all do things differently. We all have our own biases. We all prefer doing different things, formatting, sentence structure, and all those things. But the goal is to have it that it's a really well-constructed piece of writing in whatever way you like to do it. But the goal is that, like, I like to think about it for me as a reader, that I could read the first and last sentence of each paragraph and nothing else and still know what's going on, that I can still follow your line of thought. And one way to try and do this that flows well for me is the hourglass model. And the way I like to think about it is this. You start off with your introduction. In here, you're providing all the info your reader requires to have the same model or background knowledge or prior knowledge that you have, that you brought to the table when you made your observations, so that they can understand how your investigation got to where it is, how you got to your aim, and how you got to your hypothesis that's associated to that. And you can see how that in the hourglass, it starts off very broad. The information you present here should be very broad. It could cover a whole multitude of things. You're trying to get everyone on the same page. Remember, people could be reading this that aren't scientists. You're trying to bring everyone to the same point, and like that the aim and the hypothesis is like so clear, like, oh, that's how we got there. This is what we're going to be seeing the results for. This is the thing this person's changing on the independent variable, and this is the the independent variable, and the dependent variable, that measured thing, the actual conclusive thing that we're looking for, the critical test of our observation is happening because of all the information you've brought here. Starts off very broad and gets at the very, very narrowest point here is the results in the analysis. The actual, like, it's for this specific experiment. You can't get any narrower than that. And remember, this might be very short. It might be a very tiny little section, but a lot of work goes in here. It's not just a tokenistic thing. It's actually, man, it's what you're doing everything for. It's what you're setting up for. And then for me, the hardest section is the discussion section. You're talking about the limitations of your investigation here, the changes that you might want to do later. Why does your research actually matter? And that's why it's kind of narrow here still, because you're still talking about your investigation specifically, or investigations like it. Then now you need to get into what's the actual context. Why do I care about this? And why should I care about this? You need to give some context here. You need to see the relevance of your research in the wider scientific context, but also comparisons with similar research. Did your results match what other people saw? Was it different to what other people saw? Did you find something in an Australian context that's different to somewhere else? Did you find something in an American context that is different to what you found? Whatever version of it is for it looks like for your thing, your discussion is really the meat of everything. This is the bit where you're really trying to bring everything together. And it should be a little bit more specific, but it's still broad. You're still going away from just your research for the specific task. And then you would finish with your conclusion. No new information here, but rather a summary of the key points of your report or your depth study. And that for me is the Hourglass model, one way for you to think about structuring a writing. And maybe after a little water break, because I've been talking a lot, we'll get into an example of what one can look like.
Eventually.
Alrighty, so here is an example. I've written up the top here, written assignment, good example. Look, it's not perfect. It's one that I did for my master's, and it just gives us a little bit of an outline. You don't necessarily need to format it exactly the same as this, but the overall flow and the overall Hourglass model kind of shape that we're trying to that I tried to show and highlight earlier really does take place here. And I did get a good mark for this thing, humble brag, but it actually does give us a good idea of what it looks like to write in science and what you could potentially see moving forward in your studies. So what I've done here, I've indicated right from the get-go, and someone's going to see this straight away, that the purpose of this task was to be a literature review, that I was going to try and consolidate. So this is more a secondary source investigation, but try to consolidate all of the information regarding this particular topic. Now, this particular topic, temperature changes and age of growth, the indicator of synchronous change on teleost populations due to climate change. That looks very wordy, very flowery in its language, but actually it's, if you are a scientist and you have worked in anything related to marine science, that you would look at that and go, there's an increase in temperature and that there's a change in fish populations, in bony fish populations, that there's actually a relationship here, that we've got the relationship here with the independent variable, temperature, affecting fishes. Okay? Now, what we like to do in science typically is we do an abstract, which is really just a summary of the whole thing, where you kind of write one sentence about each part of your thing. Very, very, very broad here. You can see the ocean, although seen as monochromatic and a resilient medium, has been affected by years of anthropogenic or human pressures imposed on it. Very broad statement. And then goes into some actual talking about what is growth and what are fish bones, otoliths in the ear. It's trying to get everyone on the same page right from the get-go. And someone who's trying to do research, and this is what you should look for when you're doing your research, is look for abstracts, because you can find out very quickly in an abstract, is this something that's going to be useful for my discussion or useful for my introduction in providing it the right information that I need. You don't waste time then reading the whole thing. But now, let's say I'm a person that's wanting to find out about fish and climate change. This might be a good one to read based on this. And here we go. I'm going to go into my introduction and aims. Again, very, very broad language. You can see how I would love for you guys to start doing this. It's not necessarily a requirement, but I'd love to see you start doing it, because then I know you've really delved into the literature and actually tried to engage with the research, and you've actually tried to research a whole different bunch of people. And what I'm talking about here is your referencing. So for each of this section here, this was represented and taken from all of these authors, talking very broadly about the scientific community and their opinions. And what that led to was me actually presenting it's quite a long document. If you can see, it's 4,500 words. That actually, if we start to get down, that we can see that this review would like to focus on the work done in teleost fishes in terms of determining age and growth in relation to climate change from these inner ear otolith bones. And you can see this thing is very cool. It's kind of like the rings of a tree. indicating growth. We can do that in fish as well, which is quite cool. And all of this information and leading to the aim of the review or the aim of the investigation was provided at the top. And you can see it was quite a lot of stuff and very broad stuff talking about the broader scientific community's opinions and overall what does it mean to be a teleost fish, or what does climate change mean. Very, very broad stuff to get everyone on the same page by the time we get to the end of it. And then now you can start to see that we're starting to get some data here, something that's actually quite useful, and actually talking about what does it mean within the third symposium on fish otolith research. What did they focus on? And you can see here aging growth is a big representation of it. So again, building up on this thing that's saying like, hey, this thing is looking fairly important for us and fairly important for me to research. And then you go to study examples and discussion. And what a good starting point of the study examples is to look at a paper that is simply trying to achieve a growth curve for a species using the parameters for growth. Again, very broad things that we've focused on from the top, and now we're trying to narrow it down. Stuff that's useful, stuff that actually has a relationship here taken from different places. This is something that we don't do very well yet, which I'd love for you guys to start doing better, is that if you put a figure in, it's not put in just because. You've put it in because it's trying to serve a purpose. But you can't just leave it there with no context. Give it some context. Put in a figure legend. So you can see that I didn't make this. I've taken it from Restrepo, which you reference later, showing the length and age observations with the middle bold line, the estimated growth, flanked by our confidence intervals. And that's saying that all of our growth we're happy that it will be in that range. And you can actually predict stuff really well using that thing. So nothing's been put in here, and now you're going through, and do you see how many different examples are giving here from various times? And you can see mostly what I always tried to do was I tried to have it in chronological order, because we should learn more as time goes on. And I always tried to at least try and do that when I did these things. Now you can see here that we're seeing again graphs all monochromatic. You don't need flashy color to be able to have a good graph. And then if we work down again, it needs to give context. It needs to say, why is this important? And it's just this section's really important. I think this is the bit that's always a bit unevenly weighted in your assignments. Like this bit will always be the bit that to say, can you put anything into context, and can you actually show that you've done the right thing in your investigation, that you've followed the framework of scientific investigation, that you've made an observation, that you've actually used your prior knowledge to have an inquiry question that you're then turning into a hypothesis that has a relationship between the independent and the dependent variable, as in the thing you're changing and the thing you're measuring on your graphs there. That's why I'm always doing this sort of dance for you. And actually just trying to give some context, and context that people can actually, again, understand. Remember, we might have people that are reading this that aren't scientists. So you try and break everything down as much as possible depending on your audience. It's very, very important to do that. And again, now you're going to see references. Look how many there are. Lots and lots of references, all done in our Harvard system, where we have our author, the date, the actual title, and where it was published, and how long it is, and where someone can find it. There's a lot there, and you can see that it's a lot of work that goes into a review. But I hope this has made a bit more sense for you. And I think something that we can get better at doing is actually just doing your headings really appropriately. Introduction, you don't need one for your aim and your hypothesis. It should just flow in your writing. It should lead on from all that lovely stuff that you've done at the top, and everyone should be on the same page and go, yes, this must be the aim of the investigation based on what this person's written and what they've observed. And then you've actually tried to use that like your results and stuff are actually trying to communicate something rather than be flashy and rather than be quick, but actually trying to communicate a lot of information in not much space. Remember, very narrow, just your results, but it's communicating a lot of information. And that your discussion is putting everything in context. Why do I care about this? And why should I care about this? And what changes can I make? Because there's always improvements that you can make to your scientific investigation. I hope this has been useful for you. Please pause it, take notes, and come and see me, or come and see any one of your science teachers to put some of this stuff in context, because I don't think the video can always do everything for yours specifically. I hope it's been helpful, and see you back at school very soon.